Hello, and welcome to When Life Gets Tough, a podcast that tackles timely and relevant mental health topics in an easy-to-understand way. I'm your host, Katie Curtis. As always, I would like to encourage you to exercise caution when listening to our show. Today's topic is around our crisis center, including discussion of thoughts of suicide and what to do if someone discloses those to you. These conversations could be activating, so we encourage you to use thoughtful caution when listening. If you or someone you know needs mental health support, our crisis counselors are available 24/7. More information is in the episode description. Our crisis center can always be reached at 319-362-2174. Today we welcome Justin Rieg. He's our crisis center program manager. He oversees the crisis center, which answers tens of thousands of phone calls, text messages, and chat conversations every year. Welcome, Justin.
Thanks, Katie. Appreciate you having me.
For listeners who haven't contacted our crisis center before, could you tell people a little bit of what they could expect when contacting the crisis center?
Absolutely. So we're here 24/7. When you call the crisis line, you can expect to talk with a trained crisis counselor that's had a lot of education and training around difficult topics. We go from a perspective of meeting people where they're at. So what that basically means is, we're going to be willing to talk with you about whatever is troubling you that day, whether that's something that happened to you recently or whether that's a pattern of things that have occurred over time, that you're just feeling a lot of stress in that moment. We talk to people about everything from some relationship issues that they're really struggling with, all the way to thoughts of suicide or even people that are in the midst of an attempt. And so you can expect to be treated with respect and dignity. Our counselors come from a mindset of not judging. So you can expect to just talk with somebody who's objective about what's going on, really assist you kind of where you're at. And so that's kind of how the conversation will start is, what led you to call today? What are you struggling with? And if you can think of it in the moment, kind of how can we help? And that's okay if you don't know that. That's part of our training. That's part of what we're here to do is to help figure out, do you just need somebody to talk to about this? And we find a lot of our callers, that's half the battle, is feeling alone in that moment or on that day and not having somebody to reach out to. And we don't want anybody to ever feel like that. So that is a huge part of where we start with just from the beginning. We kind of go with the flow with you. What do you want to focus on? And try and work through that. We'll say the big piece of the Crisis Center and Foundation too is suicide prevention. So if you can expect that at some point during the conversation we may ask about that, if you acknowledge that that's part of the reason you're calling today, we can talk through that with you. If that's not something that you necessarily bring up, but that we may be concerned about based on if you are experiencing some depression or some other mental health symptoms, that's something we will ask about. We recognize that can be difficult to talk about, but we come from a mindset and of research that talking about suicide with people who are struggling with that is actually preventative or can be a preventative measure for somebody following through with that because it's...
Yeah, and I feel like something that we talk about often at Foundation 2 Crisis Services is the fact that when we bring up suicide, we're not putting that idea into somebody's head. So if we ask about it, we're not creating a new idea for someone. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely, and I'm so glad you brought that up, Katie. That is one of the biggest false narratives that is thought of out there, that asking someone about suicide or bringing up that discussion can activate that thought within somebody's mind and cause them to then go through with an attempt or ultimately take their life. It is actually the opposite of that. There is a tremendous amount of evidence, and we absolutely abide by this thought, that talking with people about that actually can prevent somebody or move somebody away from going through with an attempt or conducting harm on themselves and can actually be life-saving. And I think we'll probably talk about that later too in terms of how loved ones can talk about these concerns with people they may be concerned
Could you tell me a little bit about what you might say or a counselor might say to someone who feels like or is hesitating to call because they don't feel like their call is worthy of the crisis line. Maybe they are not having thoughts of suicide. It's more anxiety symptoms or depression, or they just went through a breakup or a tough relationship loss of some type, grief or loss that maybe they've experienced. What do we say to those folks, and should they still call?
Absolutely. I would say if you're thinking about calling, or you feel that talking with somebody about some type of stress or whatever's going on that has you even considering to call, to go ahead and do that. You don't have to be in the midst of the worst possible crisis to call and get support and to talk through things. And at the same time, if you feel you are at that level too, that you are at your bottom or your edge, we absolutely encourage you to call as well. But it doesn't have to be a life-changing or a life-threatening situation for somebody to call. And in fact, we talk with a lot of people that are struggling with a recent event, be it a breakup, be it the death of a loved one, be it the anniversary or just thoughts of something that's been traumatizing in the past or recently. And so if you're considering calling, don't get down on yourself that, oh, this isn't important. People have other issues to deal with. In fact, that's part of experiencing emotional turmoil, is thinking that your problems or your issues or your emotions don't rise to the level of needing help or don't rise to the level of needing additional support. So that's to be expected when we're struggling emotionally, and that's an even better reason to reach out. We don't want you to feel alone or isolated, and we're here to talk with you about whatever stress or mental health symptom, or call it what you will, that you're dealing with in that moment.
Yeah, so I know another reason why someone might call a crisis line is to talk through a situation where they are concerned about somebody. So I'm curious, we know talking about suicide is a difficult conversation, but it's life-changing and it's life-saving. So if someone does express those thoughts, what do you recommend people do to kind of start that conversation with someone they care about?
Yeah, absolutely. And we get a lot of calls about that. So say you do call and you're concerned about somebody that you work with or a loved one. The first thing that we'll do is probably work with you to figure out, to make sure that that person is safe in this moment. So we'll get whatever information you have about that. It's still confidential, but it's in the context of we're just trying to assess for somebody's immediate safety. So once we've gone through that, we will also, educate people on how to talk about suicide with loved ones or with the person of concern, because it's hard. It's hard even for people that can be experienced in this line of work. Just talking about suicide is not easy, and it's so critically important to do. And like you said, Katie, can truly be life-saving. So the tips that we in general give to people to talk to others about suicide is, first, be non-judgmental when you're talking with this person. You can feel very strongly that you don't want this person to die. You want them to feel better. You don't want them to take their life. And it is important that we try and remain supportive in those moments and not be judgmental, or even sometimes the opposite, don't be dismissive. Even if you think that this person's concerns and why they're considering suicide or potentially considering suicide aren't that grave, to that person in the moment, it may feel that way. So it's important to just be supportive and non-dismissal. We do want to have people talk openly, again, with the person they're concerned about. If you have concerns that somebody may be thinking about suicide, say they've given some hints like, I just don't want to be here anymore, the world would be better without me, or make kind of vague statements like that, we would say, ask them, are you having thoughts about suicide, or are you having thoughts about ending your life? Again, asking those direct questions has been shown to potentially move people away from the actual action and shows that you care. That's the second aspect as well. And that also gives you more information to try and collaborate with them on working toward getting some treatment for themselves, whatever that may be in the moment, connecting to referral resources. That's something else we can help with. Sometimes we offer to have that person on the phone then call the person they're concerned about with us, or call back with that person. And we can then have a more collaborative, open conversation and see how we can talk through these issues, what makes most sense for this person to help out on this day, and again, connect them to resources that can be extremely helpful and potentially life-saving as well.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing that. Yeah, I certainly can relate to, there's a lot of anxiety that comes along with asking about suicide. And I know from my experience in the field that, just being willing to sit and talk openly about the topic can really be a significant opportunity for somebody who is having those thoughts. So let's go ahead and take that situation, to the next level. Somebody decides to go ahead and seek help. They are having thoughts of suicide. Many times people can be nervous about going to an emergency room or calling the police when someone, needs that kind of support for a mental health crisis. How can your team walk callers through their options, whether that be for themselves or someone that they care about?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And there's a wide spectrum of essentially suicide risk, right? So people can be struggling with just those thoughts and don't have like a plan, they haven't taken any action or decisiveness to actually go through with that. And that's less of a situation where we may recommend somebody go to the hospital, because that's kind of like the highest level of need for somebody that's struggling. And at the same time, that can be a really good positive intervention if somebody really needs it, if somebody has reached the decision to try to end their life, or if they've made an attempt. So they've done something to try to end their life that has resulted or could result very quickly in significant injury to themselves or death. So to get back more directly to your question, how do we talk through that? There's a variety of factors, right? And so if we also, again, want to see people often know themselves best. And what we mean by that is, even in somebody's darkest moment, if have somebody to listen to them and talk through the situation, some people come away with that in thinking about suicide, that, you know what, I really think that going to the ER today and maybe getting evaluated for inpatient treatment might be the best thing for me. But maybe you don't live close by to a hospital, or you don't have transportation, you're out, in rural Iowa or someplace where there are not as easily accessible services. We may talk you through calling for an ambulance or calling for law enforcement to help facilitate that. That's typically never our first recommendation to you or offer, except in life-threatening situations.
Yeah, I think that's a good clarification you can offer to listeners. So if someone calls the crisis line and they're having thoughts of suicide, does that mean the police are going to be called? Does that mean that emergency response is going to be activated?
That is a great question. And the short answer is no. Our services are confidential. It is covered under HIPAA. If people are familiar with that, it's similar to if you go talk to your doctor about an issue, the doctor cannot turn around and tell anybody about this. The only time that we would call emergency services is, again, in a life-threatening situation. So somebody has indicated they have already done something. So say somebody calls us and has already overdosed with the intent of ending their life. We are going to try and work with that person to try and get them emergency medical help. And in fact, the act of that person reached out after making that attempt indicates some desire to get out of this situation. And so that's what we want to do, is help connect people to emergency intervention when necessary. But just because you call and say you're having thoughts of suicide, that in and of itself does not mean we're going to call emergency services. And on a huge majority, a massive majority, we do not contact emergency services. In fact, that's kind of our goal. We want to be the least and provide the least intrusive and yet most helpful intervention to you. And so if that means just talking through the situation, coming up with a safety plan, identifying some supports in your life that maybe in this moment of darkness, that hadn't come to the front of your mind, and we can come up with a collaborative plan to move forward safely. That's the ultimate goal. I mean, that's why we're here as a crisis line. That's why you don't just call 911 if you're having thoughts of suicide or feeling depressed, because we have these other options available to you that can include just talking with us. We can also connect people across the state of Iowa in a significant portion of areas to what's called mobile crisis outreach. So these are counselors that can come out into the community, to your home if needed, and talk to you and help you through that, whatever situation you're struggling with today. That's free and confidential as well. They do not, in most areas of the state, come with law enforcement. And it's just another good option we can discuss as well. So there's essentially all these other options outside of emergency services, of 911, of the ER, and that is our main focus. And we also meet people where they're at. So if somebody is at high risk of suicide, their life is in danger, we are absolutely going to do what we can to try to help them.
Thank you so much for sharing some more details about the Crisis Center and about mobile crisis outreach. Before we close, as an employee myself at Foundation 2, I have a lot of pride in the work that we do. And as the leader of the Crisis Center, I imagine you carry a lot of pride in the team that you supervise. That's an incredible service, literally saving people's lives every single day. Can you talk a little bit about the team, some of the skills that they have, and just the wins that maybe we don't hear as often about?
Absolutely, and thanks for bringing that up, Katie. We do have just an amazing team at the Foundation 2 Crisis Center. We have supervisors that help support staff with difficult situations. Our counselors themselves, we have such a mix of, we have people that have been here for decades, got to do it when they were young, and just found so much joy in the work, in bringing light to people's darkness, and in just moments of despair, bringing people out of that. And we also have people that are newer to the field, but have this drive, this desire, and also education and training that we provide to try and help people. And it's such a great opportunity to meet and talk with so many people in so many different walks of life that contact the Crisis Center for assistance.
Well, thank you so much for giving us some of your time today, Justin. I know you're always busy running a 24/7 service. As always, if you or someone is in need of mental health support, Foundation 2 Crisis Services is here for you 24/7 every single day of the year. All of our crisis services are free and confidential, and you can call the crisis line anytime at 319-362-2174. Thank you for joining us for When Life Gets Tough. We hope you'll join us next time.